The last $3 sat in Marcus's palm like a verdict. He stood at the counter of a fluorescent-lit fast food joint on Fulton Street, staring at the overhead menu as though something might have gotten cheaper since yesterday. It hadn't. He ordered a small box of chicken and rice, the kind that came in a styrofoam container so thin you could feel the heat burn straight through to your skin, and stepped back outside into the November air. His body ached in places he had stopped naming. 12 hours between the restaurant kitchen and the warehouse loading dock had left his lower back locked tight and his fingers stiff. But the night wasn't done yet. Elijah was waiting at home, 5 years old, probably sitting on the floor by the front door with that same picture book he'd read 40 times because there wasn't a new one to replace it. Marcus had promised him he'd be back before bedtime. He was already late. He crossed to the bench near the bus stop on the corner of Fulton and Waverly, sat down, and opened the styrofoam box. Steam rose into the cold air. The smell of seasoned rice and fried chicken hit him hard. Not because it was good, but because he realized how long it had been since he last ate. 14 hours, maybe more. He couldn't remember. That's when he saw her. Across the street, tucked into the shallow doorway of a closed laundromat, a young woman sat on the concrete with her knees drawn up. She couldn't have been older than 19 or 20. A backpack leaned against her hip, stuffed so full the zipper had given up halfway. On her lap sat a textbook, thick, dog-eared, the spine cracked and taped. Her eyes had already found the styrofoam box in his hands. For one unguarded second, her hunger was completely visible, raw, honest, almost animal. Then she looked away fast, turning her face toward the dark glass of the laundromat door as if she'd rather disappear than be caught wanting. Marcus knew that look. He had worn it himself more times than he could count. At job interviews where they'd already decided before he sat down. At grocery stores where he put things back on the shelf one by one until the total fit what was in his pocket. The expression of someone who had learned that needing something in public was its own kind of shame. He looked down at the box. One meal. The only meal he'd have until tomorrow's shift started again. If he gave it away, he'd spend the night running on nothing but tap water and willpower. And tomorrow, when the loading dock demanded his back and arms for another 10 hours, he'd have nothing in the tank. But Elijah's face flashed through his mind. Not the boy waiting at home, but the boy watching his father, watching what his father did when someone else was hungry and the world wasn't looking. Marcus closed the styrofoam lid. He stood up, and he walked across the street. If this story already has your attention, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this one, real, raw, and worth your time. Now let's continue. Marcus didn't say anything when he reached her. He just held out the box. The girl looked up at him with an expression that wasn't gratitude. It was suspicion. Her eyes moved from the styrofoam container to his face, then to the street behind him, as if checking whether this was some kind of setup. Her jaw tightened. She shook her head once, quick and firm, and turned back to the textbook on her lap. "I'm good," she said. Her voice was hoarse, the kind of rough that came from not using it much or not drinking enough water. Maybe both. Marcus set the box down on the step beside her, straightened up, and walked back across the street. He didn't push. He didn't wait for a thank you. He sat on his bench, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. When he opened them 5 minutes later, the box was open on her lap, and she was eating with the careful, measured pace of someone who knew that eating too fast on an empty stomach would make you sick. She never looked at him again that night. He caught his bus home. Elijah was asleep on the floor by the front door, his cheek pressed against the worn carpet, one hand still curled around the picture book. "Goodnight Moon," the cover half torn, the pages soft as cloth from overuse. Marcus lifted him gently, carried him to the narrow bed they shared in the one-bedroom apartment, and pulled the blanket up. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. His stomach turned in on itself, and he pressed his fist against it hard, as if pressure could replace food. He didn't regret it, but he also couldn't afford to make a habit of it, except it became one. Over the next several weeks, Marcus kept seeing her. The same girl, the same doorway, the same stuffed backpack and beaten textbook. Some nights she was reading, some nights she was writing in a notebook, filling pages with handwriting so small it seemed like she was trying to fit an entire life onto each line. Some nights she was just sitting there, staring at nothing, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. He learned her patterns the way you learn anything on the street, by paying attention without staring. She showed up around 6 in the evening and disappeared before midnight. She never begged. She never asked anyone for anything. Once, a man passing by tossed a dollar bill in her direction, and she picked it up and placed it on the windowsill of the laundromat without touching it again, as though accepting charity from a stranger's pity was a line she had drawn for herself. That pride, stubborn, quiet, almost self-destructive, was something Marcus recognized. He had built his whole life around the same principle. You don't ask, you endure, you figure it out alone. He didn't give her food every night, he couldn't. Some nights all he had was a granola bar from the warehouse break room, and he'd break it in half and leave one piece on the step as he passed. Some nights he had nothing at all, and could only nod at her from across the street, an acknowledgement that she existed, that someone saw her. She never thanked him, she never introduced herself, and Marcus never asked her name. There was an unspoken agreement between them. This wasn't friendship and it wasn't charity. It was just two people occupying the same corner of a city that had forgotten about both of them. The night everything shifted was a Thursday. Marcus had picked up Elijah early from the neighbor's apartment where the boy stayed during evening shifts. The bus was late, and the two of them ended up sitting on the bench at the Fulton Street stop, Elijah's small hand gripping his father's jacket sleeve. The girl was there, in her usual spot. Elijah noticed her before Marcus could redirect his attention. The boy stared for a long moment, not with the blank curiosity most children had toward strangers, but with something deeper. His brow furrowed, his grip on Marcus's sleeve tightened. "Dad," Elijah said quietly, "does that lady not have a house?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at the girl, at the backpack that served as her pillow, the shoes with soles worn almost to nothing, the notebook still open even though the streetlight above her had burned out weeks ago and she was writing in near darkness. "I don't know, son," he said. "She looks cold." "Yeah, can we give her something?" Marcus felt the question land in his chest like a stone, not because it was hard to answer, but because his 5-year-old had just said out loud the thing he had been wrestling with for weeks. The simplicity of a child's compassion, unfiltered by calculation, unweighted by consequence. Can we give her something? As though giving was the obvious thing, as though keeping was the choice that needed explaining. He looked at Elijah, really looked at him. This boy who never asked for new shoes, who never complained when dinner was rice and canned beans for the 4th night in a row, who had somehow learned at 5 years old that the world gave you what it gave you, and you said thank you anyway. If Marcus walked past that girl tonight, if he taught his son through silence that you kept your head down and minded your own survival, what lesson would settle into this child's bones? Marcus reached into the plastic bag on his lap. Inside was a container of leftover stew from the restaurant kitchen. The cook had let him take it, a small mercy at the end of a brutal shift. It was meant to be their dinner tomorrow. 1 container, 2 meals if he stretched it, enough to keep them both going through another day. He pulled it out, stood up, and walked across the street. Elijah watched from the bench. The girl looked up. This time something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion, not resistance, but a crack. A thin fracture in the wall she had built between herself and every other human being. Marcus set the container down beside her. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "But my kid wanted you to have this." He pointed back toward the bench. Elijah gave a small, shy wave. The girl looked at the boy. Then she looked at the container. Then she pressed her lips together hard, and her eyes went red, and she nodded once. A nod that carried more weight than any sentence could. Marcus walked back to the bench. Elijah leaned into his side. They sat together in the cold, waiting for the bus, and neither of them said a word about what had just happened. But something had begun. Something that couldn't be taken back. Her name was Nadine. Marcus learned it the way he learned everything about her. Slowly, in fragments, through sentences she offered like someone pulling threads from a fraying cloth, careful not to unravel the whole thing at once. It started the week after Elijah's wave from the bench. She was there at the usual spot, and when Marcus passed by with half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin, she spoke for the first time beyond single-word refusals. "You don't have to keep doing this." He stopped. "I know. I'm not some project." "Didn't say you were." A pause, then, "Nadine." He nodded. "Marcus." That was the entire conversation. He left the sandwich and walked away. But a door had opened. Barely a crack, just enough for air to pass through. The weeks that followed built something neither of them had a name for. It wasn't friendship in the traditional sense. They didn't exchange phone numbers or talk about their lives in full. It was more like a rhythm. Marcus would stop by the bench or the doorway, and if he had food, he'd share it. If he didn't, he'd sit nearby for a few minutes and they'd exist in the same silence. Sometimes Nadine would say something small, a comment about the cold, a complaint about a library closing early, a half sentence about a class she was trying not to fail. Marcus would listen. He never gave advice. He never asked questions she hadn't opened the door to. But the cost was real. At home, the math got tighter. Marcus started skipping meals more deliberately, not just the occasional missed lunch, but planned hunger. He'd eat half of whatever he brought home and wrap the other half for the next day's delivery to the Fulton Street doorway. Elijah didn't say anything at first. The boy had an instinct for silence, a way of absorbing his father's tension without naming it. Then, one Tuesday night, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table with Elijah, a single plate of rice and canned vegetables between them. He'd already set aside a portion for Nadine. His own plate held barely enough to count as a meal. Elijah ate quietly for a few minutes. Then, without a word, he took his fork, scooped half the rice from his plate, and pushed it onto his father's. Marcus stared at the plate. His throat closed. He looked at his son, this 5-year-old boy who had never been taught this gesture, who had simply watched and absorbed and decided on his own that if his father was giving things away, then he would give something too. "Eat your food, Eli." "You eat too, Dad." Marcus pressed his hand over his eyes. He sat like that for a long time. When he finally dropped his hand, he pulled the plate back toward Elijah, took one small bite from his own, and said, "Deal." He was proud of the boy, and he was gutted by him, because a child shouldn't know how to do that. A child should be thinking about cartoons and playground games, not rationing rice with his father at a kitchen table with one leg propped up by a phone book. Nadine's story came out in pieces over the following weeks. She was 19. She'd grown up in a small town outside of Baltimore, a family that worked factory jobs and believed school past a certain point was a waste of time for a girl. When she'd gotten a partial scholarship to a community college in the city, her mother told her she was being selfish. When she left anyway, the phone calls stopped. Then the texts. Then everything. She'd held it together for a semester, staying in a shared room, working part-time at a copy shop, keeping her grades alive. Then the roommate moved out, the rent doubled, and the copy shop closed. Within 2 months, she was sleeping in shelters when there was space and on the street when there wasn't. The backpack on her hip held everything: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, 3 textbooks, and the notebook she wrote in every night. "What do you write?" Marcus asked once. "Everything I'm going to do when this is over," she said. Then she almost smiled. "It's a long list." Marcus didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't offer solutions. He just nodded, and she understood that the nod meant something more than words could. It meant he believed the list was real. The turning point came on an afternoon when Marcus brought Elijah to the bus stop again. The boy had been quiet all day, clutching something behind his back as they walked. When they reached the bench and Nadine looked up from her usual spot, Elijah crossed the street by himself, Marcus watching every step, and held out his picture book. "Good night, Moon," the only book he owned. "You can read this," Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It makes you feel better when you're sad." Nadine took the book. She looked at it, the torn cover, the pages softened by years of small hands, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, she smiled. Not a half smile or a polite acknowledgement, but a real, full, unguarded smile that broke across her face like something she had forgotten she was capable of. "Thank you," she said. And the way she said it, careful, almost reverent, made it clear she understood exactly what this cost a 5-year-old boy who had nothing else. Marcus watched from across the street, his chest tight. What his son had just given away was worth more than every sandwich and container of stew combined. And he knew it. And it terrified him. And it made him believe, just for a second, that he was raising the boy right. Then came the day Marcus had nothing. He'd lost the kitchen job 3 days earlier. The restaurant had cut staff, and he was the last hired, the first gone. The warehouse still had him on nights, but the check wouldn't come for another week, and the rent was due in 2 days. He had $18 left. $18 for 7 days. For food, for bus fare, for the electricity bill that was already in the red. He went to the Fulton Street bench anyway, not because he had something to give, but because not going felt like a different kind of failure. Nadine was there. She looked up and immediately read his face, the way people who have lived on the edge can read desperation in others the way most people read street signs. "Bad day?" she asked. "Bad week." He sat on the step beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus reached over and pulled her notebook toward him. She watched, but didn't stop him. He tore a small piece of paper from the back page, borrowed the pen tucked into the spiral binding, and wrote 7 words. "You'll be okay. Don't stop. M." He folded the paper and handed it to her. Nadine unfolded it, read it, and folded it again, slowly, precisely, as though it were something made of glass. She slipped it into the front page of her notebook and pressed the cover flat. "You don't know that," she said quietly, "that I'll be okay." "No," Marcus said, "but I believe it." It was the only thing he had left to give, and somehow, sitting there on that step with an empty stomach and a life that was falling apart in slow motion, it felt like the most honest thing he had ever offered anyone. After that night, the weight of 2 lives pressed harder on Marcus. He picked up extra hours at the warehouse, overnight shifts that ended at 4 in the morning, leaving him 3 hours of sleep before the day started again. Elijah stayed at the neighbor's apartment more often, and Marcus could see the effect. The boy was quieter, clingier, his eyes tracking his father's movements with the vigilance of a child who was afraid of being left behind. One night, Marcus came home at 2 a.m. and found Elijah asleep on the kitchen floor, a blanket pulled from the bed and dragged across the apartment like a trail marking the path from their room to the front door. The boy had been trying to wait up. A glass of water sat on the counter. Elijah must have poured it for him, the way Marcus always poured one for the boy before bedtime. The glass was still full. Marcus stood over it for a long moment, staring at this small act of care from a 5-year-old who had no business taking care of anyone. Then he lifted his son, heavier now than even a month ago, growing in the way children do, silently and without permission, and carried him to bed. He stood there in the dark, looking at his son's face, and felt the guilt settle over him like a second skin. He was trying to be good to Nadine, trying to be good to Elijah, trying to be good to a world that had never been particularly good to him. But the math didn't work. There wasn't enough of him to go around. Meanwhile, Nadine's situation was crumbling. She told Marcus she was about to lose her scholarship. The college required a permanent address for enrollment verification, and she didn't have one. Her health was slipping too. She was thinner than when they'd first met, and the cough she'd had for weeks wasn't going away. Marcus could feel it. The same way you feel a storm coming before the sky changes, that she was running out of time at that doorway. One bad night, one wrong encounter, one bureaucratic door slammed in her face, and she would disappear. The connection between the 3 of them, Marcus, Elijah, Nadine, had become something fragile and vital, like a thread holding 3 lives above a long fall. And Marcus could feel it stretching. Then, one evening in late January, Marcus walked to the Fulton Street bench and the doorway was empty. No backpack, no notebook, no Nadine. He stood there for a long time, looking at the bare concrete step where she usually sat, the laundromat door dark behind it. He came back the next night, and the next, and every night for 2 weeks after that. The doorway stayed empty. He asked around, the bus driver who worked the late route, the man who sold newspapers from the corner stand, the woman at the shelter 3 blocks east. Nobody had seen her. Nobody knew her last name. Nobody could tell him anything. Elijah asked on a Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, "Dad, where did Miss Nadine go?" Marcus poured milk into the bowl and set the carton back in the refrigerator, taking his time. "I think she found a better place, Eli." "Is she coming back?" "I don't know." Elijah stirred his cereal, thinking. Then he said, "She still has my book." Marcus sat down across from him. "Yeah," he said, "she does." The boy seemed to consider this for a moment. Then he nodded, as if the fact that Nadine had his book meant she was still out there somewhere, still reading it, still connected to them by that one small, worn-out copy of Goodnight Moon. Marcus wished he had the boy's faith. But what he had instead was a hollow space where something small and important used to be. The knowledge that he had tried, and it hadn't been enough. And now the person he'd tried for was gone without a trace. He stopped going to the Fulton Street bench after that. The doorway was just a doorway again. Winter pushed on into spring, and spring into a summer that baked the sidewalks and filled the streets with noise and bodies. Life demanded its usual pound of flesh, and Marcus paid it the way he always did, with his back, his hands, and whatever was left of his sleep. He found a second kitchen job. He bought Elijah a new book, a real one from a bookstore, not a thrift shop. The boy held it like it was made of gold. Some nights, lying in the dark after Elijah had fallen asleep, Marcus would stare at the ceiling and wonder. Not with hope, he had used up most of that, but with the stubborn, low-grade ache of someone who had extended a hand and felt it close around empty air. The note he'd written was out there somewhere, folded inside a notebook he would never see again. And Nadine was a name that would, over time, become less a person and more a question he couldn't answer. Did any of it matter? 10 years is long enough to bury almost anything. Marcus was 40 now. The sharp edges of his younger years had been worn smooth, not by comfort but by repetition. He still worked with his hands, though the warehouse job had eventually led to a steady position as a maintenance supervisor at a mid-size office building downtown. The pay was modest but reliable. He had health insurance for the first time in his life. The apartment was still small, still in the same neighborhood, but the furniture was better and the refrigerator was always full. Elijah was 15, tall, quiet, serious in a way that made teachers either admire him or worry about him. He read constantly, not because anyone told him to, but because somewhere in his early childhood, a seed had been planted that books were valuable, that words on a page could carry you somewhere better. He had his father's stubborn work ethic, and something else Marcus couldn't take credit for, a gentleness, a way of listening to people that made them feel heard. His grades were strong. His teachers used words like potential and scholarship material. Marcus heard these words and felt two things at once: pride so deep it ached, and a dull terror that the world would find a way to take it back. The memory of Nadine had not vanished, but it had settled into a lower register, the kind of thing Marcus thought about late at night when the apartment was quiet and Elijah was asleep, and there was nothing left to fix or clean or prepare for tomorrow. He didn't go to the Fulton Street bench anymore. The laundromat had been torn down 2 years ago, replaced by a vape shop with neon signs in the window. The doorway where she used to sit no longer existed. Sometimes, on nights when the stillness got too heavy, Marcus would wonder what had happened to her, whether the notebook was still somewhere, whether the note was still folded inside it, whether she had made it through, or whether the city had swallowed her the way it swallowed so many people who had no one standing between them and the fall. He never found out. He assumed he never would. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in September. It was addressed to Marcus directly, not to resident or tenant, but to him, by name, at his correct address. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, with a logo in the upper left corner, Bridgewell Community Foundation. Inside was a single-page letter inviting him to an informational session about a new scholarship and mentorship program for families in underserved communities. Elijah's name was mentioned. There was a date, a time, and an address in a part of downtown Marcus had never had reason to visit. He almost threw it away. He got letters like this sometimes, programs that promised opportunity but delivered paperwork and dead ends. But Elijah's name on the page stopped him. He folded the letter, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to work. He thought about it for 3 days. On Friday, he told Elijah about it. "Some program wants to talk to us. Scholarship thing." Elijah looked up from his homework. "For real?" "Maybe. Maybe not. We'll go see." The Bridgewell office was on the 14th floor of a glass-fronted building on Lexington Avenue. The kind of building Marcus entered only to mop floors and replace light fixtures. He wore his cleanest shirt, the one he saved for parent-teacher conferences, and Elijah wore a button-down that was slightly too big in the shoulders. They sat in a waiting area with leather chairs and a water dispenser that offered 3 temperatures. Marcus poured himself a cup of cold water and held it without drinking, just to have something to do with his hands. A woman stepped out of the conference room. She was around 30, dressed in a dark blazer, her hair pulled back. She carried herself with a specific kind of confidence, not inherited but built, the kind that came from climbing. She introduced herself to the small group of families gathered in the waiting area, welcomed them, and began to speak about the foundation's mission, providing full academic scholarships and mentorship to students from low-income households, with a focus on those being raised by single parents. Marcus listened. The program sounded real, not a scam, not a publicity stunt, but something designed by a person who understood what poverty actually looked like from the inside. The language was specific. The details were practical. This wasn't someone who had read about struggle in a textbook. This was someone who had lived it. He was thinking about the application process when the woman paused mid-sentence. She was looking directly at him, not at the group, at him. Her expression shifted. She had known his name was on the invitation list. She had been the one who put it there. But knowing he might walk through that door and actually seeing him sitting in the 3rd row, 10 years older, wearing his best shirt, holding a cup of water he hadn't touched, were 2 completely different things. Her composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for Marcus to see something underneath it that he couldn't immediately name. She recovered quickly and finished her presentation, but Marcus had seen it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he hadn't visited in years, something stirred. After the session, as the other families filed toward the elevator, the woman approached him. She stood in front of him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her hands trembling at her sides. "Marcus," she said. One word, his name, but the way she said it, like she'd been holding it in her mouth for a decade, told him everything. He looked at her face. The sharpness of the cheekbones was the same. The eyes were the same. But the hollowness was gone. The exhaustion was gone. The girl who used to sit in a dark doorway with a cracked textbook was standing in front of him in a 14th floor office, and she was whole. "Nadine?" She nodded. Her eyes filled but didn't spill over. She had clearly imagined this moment before, maybe dozens of times, but the reality of it had knocked the script out of her hands. Marcus didn't move. He stood very still, processing, recalibrating, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the ghost he had stopped looking for years ago. Part of him wanted to cross the distance immediately, but a larger part, the part that had spent a decade learning not to need anything from anyone, held him in place. "I looked for you," he said, "for a while." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." An awkward silence. Elijah stood a few feet behind Marcus, watching with the alert stillness of a boy who could feel that something important was happening, but didn't yet understand what. They sat in a small office down the hall. Elijah waited outside, scrolling through his phone on a bench by the elevator, giving his father space he seemed to instinctively understand was needed. Nadine told him what happened. The night she disappeared, A social worker from a non-profit had found her at the shelter 3 blocks east of Fulton Street. The organization had one emergency spot open in a transitional housing program, in another city, 200 miles away. Nadine had to decide in under an hour. There was no time to go back to the doorway. She didn't have Marcus's number, didn't know his last name, didn't know how to find him. She left that night on a bus with her backpack and notebook and nothing else. "I thought about going back," she said, "every day for months, but I didn't even know your last name. All I had was Marcus and Fulton Street, and by the time I was stable enough to look, I didn't know if you'd still be there." Marcus nodded. He understood disappearance. He understood the way survival demanded forward motion and punished anyone who tried to look back. Then Nadine reached into her bag. She pulled out a small piece of paper, yellowed, soft at the folds, the edges feathered from years of handling. She unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. "You'll be okay. Don't stop. M." Marcus stared at it. His own handwriting from a night he barely remembered, on a scrap torn from her notebook with numb fingers and an empty stomach. "This got me through the first year," Nadine said, "and the second, and every year after that, not because of what it says, but because of who wrote it. A man who had nothing, who was struggling to feed his own kid, sat down next to me and told me I'd be okay. And he meant it." She paused. "You were the first person who ever treated me like I was worth something without wanting something back." Marcus pressed his jaw tight. He didn't trust himself to speak. Nadine continued. She explained the foundation. She had built it herself over the past 3 years, after finishing her degree and working her way through the non-profit sector. The scholarship program was real, funded, operational, and she had designed it around a specific idea, that the people best equipped to change a child's future were the ones who had survived their own. "I want to offer Elijah a full scholarship," she said. "Tuition, books, mentorship, all of it through college. He qualifies on every metric, and I've already reviewed his school records." Marcus leaned back. The reflex was immediate and familiar, the same reflex that had governed his entire adult life. Don't take what you didn't earn. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't do what I did so someone would pay me back." "I know," Nadine said. "That's exactly why you deserve this." She leaned forward. "You taught me that accepting help doesn't mean you're weak. Don't take that lesson away from me by refusing." The sentence hit Marcus in a place he didn't have defenses for. He sat with it for a long time. The office was quiet. Through the glass wall, he could see Elijah on the bench, long legs stretched out, head tilted back against the wall, completely unaware that his life was being rewritten 30 feet away. Marcus looked at his son. 15 years old, quiet, smart, gentle in a way the world hadn't beaten out of him yet. A boy who, at 5, had given away his only book to a stranger because he thought it might make her less sad. A boy who had split his rice without being asked, who had poured a glass of water for a father who came home too late, who had grown up in a small apartment with not enough of anything except love. This boy deserved a door that opened. "Okay," Marcus said. They left the building together. Marcus, Elijah, and Nadine, stepping out onto Lexington Avenue in the late afternoon light. Nadine shook Elijah's hand and told him she looked forward to working with him. Elijah, polite and a little overwhelmed, said thank you and glanced at his father for confirmation that all of this was real. On the bus home, Elijah sat by the window and Marcus sat beside him. The city passed outside. Bodegas, fire escapes, laundromats, church steeples, the ordinary architecture of a life lived at street level. The boy was quiet for a long time. Marcus could feel him thinking, turning something over in his mind the way he always did before speaking, careful, deliberate, never wasting words. Then he said, "Dad, that lady, did you know her?" "A long time ago." "How?" Marcus thought about how to answer. Then he said, "I shared a meal with her once, when we were both having a hard time." Elijah considered this. "And now she's helping us?" "Yeah." The boy nodded slowly, looking out the window at the city scrolling past. "That's kind of amazing." Marcus didn't respond. He just sat there, watching the streets go by, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The quiet, almost unbearable sensation that something he had done in the dark, with no witness and no expectation, had mattered after all. On a Saturday afternoon in early October, Marcus took Elijah to Fulton Street. The laundromat was gone. The doorway where Nadine used to sit had been replaced by a storefront with tinted windows and a neon sign. The bench at the bus stop was still there, newer, repainted green, bolted into the same patch of concrete. But it was the same corner, the same stretch of sidewalk where everything had started. Marcus sat down. Elijah sat beside him. The boy didn't know why his father had brought him here. Marcus hadn't explained. He just said, "I want to show you something." And they'd taken the bus across town without another word. Now Marcus reached into the plastic bag on his lap and pulled out a styrofoam container. Chicken and rice from the same place on the block, the same $3 meal, though it cost $7 now. He opened it. Steam rose into the October air, the same way it had risen on that November night a decade ago, when he had sat on this bench with nothing but a meal and a choice. He broke the portion in half. He set one side in the lid and handed it to Elijah. Elijah took it. He looked at his father, then at the street, then at the half portion in his hands. He didn't ask what this was about. At 15, he had developed the same instinct his father carried, the ability to understand a moment without demanding it explain itself. They ate in silence. The city moved around them. Buses, strangers, the ordinary machinery of a world that didn't stop for anyone. A man at the corner sold bottled water from a cooler. A woman pushed a stroller past the bench without looking up. The late afternoon sun hit the buildings across the street and turned the windows gold. Marcus watched his son eat. This boy who, at 5 years old, had given away his only book, who had split his rice in half without being asked, who had grown into someone steady and kind in a world that rewarded neither quality. Whatever Marcus had done right in his life, and he was never sure it was much, it was sitting next to him on this bench. "Dad?" Elijah said. "Yeah. Thanks for bringing me here." Marcus nodded. He didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say. The meal was small, the bench was ordinary, and the street was just a street. But somewhere between the first bite and the last, a circle had closed. Quietly, without ceremony, the way all the most important things happen. A father who gave when he had nothing. A stranger who carried that gift for 10 years. A son who learned, without ever being taught, that the thing you give away is the only thing you truly keep. Maybe you know someone like Marcus. Maybe you are someone like Marcus, giving more than you have, wondering if it makes a difference. It does. It always does, even when you can't see it yet. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell here is a reminder that ordinary people doing quiet and unnoticed things are the ones who change the world.